Hello everybody, I hope you have a wonderful day. Today in this video, I would like to talk about fasting, which means not eating. You can fast from many things, of course, but today it's all about not eating for a little while. I would like to take you on a wonderful journey and show you what actually happens when you fast, and what beautiful things nature has in place for us during the times when we're not eating. So let's have a look at fasting and how fasting can be the best method for better health, for longevity, and how fasting is an absolutely potent anti-aging method. As usual, this is no individual health advice. And as always, if you are unhealthy, if you've got metabolic problems, please see your low-carb practitioner or your health coach. And if you're pregnant or breastfeeding, or if you're a teenager, then you probably do not belong to the groups of people that should do prolonged fasting. Everything I'm saying here today is completely evidence-based, so you can find the research which backed up the entire video just down in the description box. So let me start off this presentation with a simple question. What would you think if I ask you, hey, can you not eat for 3 days? What goes through your head? Most people think, oh my God, I could never do this. Even though everyone I ask said, have you ever done it? So how do you know you never do it? So the reason is most people do think, oh my God, I'm going to be so hungry. I will be so weak, so lethargic. I could never ever do this. My blood sugar will be so low that I completely become delusional, I become hypoglycemic, I become completely miserable, so I can't do it. Or they think, oh my God, my muscles are going to be consumed because the moment I skip a meal and my body needs proteins, it goes straight for the muscles. Or they think, oh my God, I miss out on nutrients and I become nutrient deficient. So that's usually what people think when they think about fasting. So let's go back to our ancestors. They have been probably very, very happy if they had a good meal. But let's be serious. Did they have 3 meals a day with 3 snacks in between? Most likely not. Of course, happy days when they had something to eat, and they probably ate a lot until the whole mammoth was gone. But the reality is they had lots of days where they had nothing to eat, particularly over the winter days, where food was very, very rare and it wasn't easily to be found or to be hunted. Depends. So if everything that we believe is true about fasting, they would have become fairly weak. Their muscles would have declined, their metabolism would have gone down, they would have felt miserable, lethargic, their blood glucose would have gone down completely, rendering them delusional. Eventually, they would have become so thin after just a few days because the body was just consuming all their muscles in order to survive. They would have been probably curled up in the cave, being completely miserable, lethargic, and then patiently waited for the end. I mean, come on, let's be serious here. So if that was all true, we would not be here. That's obvious. We wouldn't have survived for the last 2.5 million years if we would have become completely extinct, or if we would have died within a few days of not eating. So reality is our ancestors, our Paleolithic ancestors, they didn't have much to eat, or maybe nothing, for weeks on end, and yet we are here today. So what was completely involuntary for our prehistoric or Paleolithic ancestors became voluntary over the years. So we've been fasting for many, many times, yet all the major religions have one thing in common, and that's fasting. They may beat each other up and have wars over their difference of traditional teachings, but fasting is one big thing in common. And what's fasting normally associated with? And that's cleansing, rejuvenation. It's also time for spiritual reflection and self-improvement. So fasting is nothing new to us. So it's been there with us pretty much since the beginning of the time. So before I start, I would like to do just one clarification. So when I talk about fasting here today, I'm talking about complete caloric abstinence, so no caloric intake. Fasting is not the same as caloric restriction. So fasting means no food whatsoever. However, everything I'm talking about today means you can drink and you should drink a lot of water, and that's fluids. It's water, coffee, or tea. So fasting, yes, it is caloric restriction, like big time, but it's not. It's 0 calories. Whereas caloric restriction is a little bit of food every now and then. So the major difference between the two is our nutrient sensors, which is insulin and mTOR. Insulin and mTOR go up the moment we eat something, telling the body, hey, there's food coming in, let's keep it and store it. Whereas if we don't eat anything at all, the entire biochemical mechanisms in our bodies are completely different. So if you don't eat anything at all, insulin and mTOR are down. So, and that's the main difference between fasting and caloric restriction. Are you ready for the wonderful journey?
Okay, here I would like to introduce you to a few physiological processes that actually happen during fasting. In the first 4 to 6 hours, your energy from food will decline. So you've eaten something, and in the first 4 to 6 hours, you basically digest what you've been eating. So if you're carb addicted or you're carb adjusted, let's say it that way, it sounds a bit better, you will feel hungry after 4 to 6 hours, regardless of how many calories you have consumed. If you're on a low carb or ketogenic diet, however, you won't feel any hunger. The next 12 to 24 hours, that's when you burn all your glycogen stores. Because the insulin levels are going down, your liver is actually allowed to open up those stores. And then once those stores are depleted, your liver starts making glucose out of proteins or amino acids, which are the building blocks of proteins. And it does not use our muscles for that. So there's constantly a certain amount of protein turnover in our body, and that's what the liver is utilizing to make new glucose. And the process is called glyconeogenesis, which basically means making new glucose. So the liver will maintain a low level of glucose for whatever length of time you want to fast. And that's basically to keep our red blood cells, our brain, and our kidneys happy. They appreciate just this very, very small amount of glucose. And the liver is having everything under control. So if you made it up to 24 hours, congratulations, how are you going to feel? So if you're on a low carb or ketogenic diet, you feel fantastic. You're not going to feel much of a difference. If you are used to eat large amount of carbohydrates, you probably feel a little bit lousy and a bit hungry, but that's because carbohydrates are addictive, or the sugar that comes from the carbohydrates. And I have another video about how sugar is actually as addictive as heroin. So as next, the insulin levels and the mTOR levels are starting to go down. So they are our nutrient sensors. When no carbohydrates, ARCA glucose comes in, insulin says, oh, there's nothing there, so I don't have to do anything, I'll go down. And the same happens with mTOR. mTOR senses primarily proteins, and if those levels are going down, that basically signals the body, look, there's nothing coming in. And that's very important. So our insulin levels will not drop dangerously low. We need a little bit of insulin for the protein synthesis. So we still make proteins in the whole process, even though we're not eating anything, and I will go to it later on. So it's not going to drop dangerously low. But those low levels of insulin and mTOR basically initiate a switch of fuel sources. So we switch from glucose, which primarily come from carbohydrates, to ketones, which primarily comes from fat metabolism. And I have another video where I explain in detail how insulin and weight loss and fat burning all is interlinked with each other. So this fuel switching happens in the first 12 to 18 hours of fasting. So the lack of food and the low insulin and mTOR levels are basically starting to promote ketone production, and that primarily comes from fat burning. So where's our fat primarily stored? We have one, that's the visceral fat. That's the fat we don't want. That's the fat around our organs, including the fat in our fatty liver. That's what we want to get rid of. That's what makes us sick. And the second large fat stores is the subcutaneous fat. That's the fat under our skin. That's what we can squeeze and jiggle. That's not as dangerous, and it's completely not in our control where our body prefers to accumulate the fat. So that's why, because the visceral fat, the organ fat, is so much more dangerous. The body will always clean out the organ fat first before it goes into the subcutaneous fat. So why would I like to have ketones? Ketones can be used by every cell in our body, including the brain. So the brain is not an obligate glucose utilizer. It's absolutely not. Another reassuring thing is like the ketones come from our body fat. That's good to know, because that's what we want to get rid of. Ketones in itself is the much better fuel. It produces, during its burning, it produces significantly less oxidative stress, which means our mitochondria, which are the powerhouses of our cells that make all the energy that we need, they have increased health. So they feel much better burning ketones as opposed to glucose. Ketones is a very, very potent hunger depressor, and especially it suppresses cravings quite successfully. So you won't feel hungry if you're not eating for a while, because those ketones suppress exactly that. Our brain, our hearts, they just love ketones. They function so much better on ketones than they would on glucose. Ketones also have very neuroprotective properties, so they protect our brain and our entire nervous system. So hence, ketones are also linked to or are called a mood stabilizer. You feel much better and you have much more mental clarity. So if someone is on a low carb or ketogenic diet, they have all these benefits day in and day out, because their insulin levels are low at all times, allowing the ketone production to actually happen. So what else happens with elevated ketone production? So we activate an enzyme or factor. It's called brain-derived neurotrophic factor. So it sounds pretty scary, but what is that? So it really promotes the survival, the maturation, and the maintenance of our brain and nerve cells. So that's like oil for all our nervous system. It encourages the growth and the differentiation of new neurons and synapses. It actually makes new brain cells. That is absolutely wonderful. And in fact, there actually have been some studies where they had people with basically disorders as in Parkinson's and Huntington's disease, and also Alzheimer's. When they fasted those people for a little while, a couple of days, they had improved cognitive function, and they had improved mental clarity. So that's really, really good, what this sort of what BDNF can do for us. What happens as well after a few hours of fasting? So we will have an increased level of stress hormones. So that starts at about 18 hours. Increased levels of stress hormones does not mean that we are stressed all the time. It just means that we have an increased level of adrenaline or noradrenaline and cortisol. And what are they good for? To just maintain our metabolism. So our resting energy actually goes up by about 10 to 12%, depends on the study. So it means fasting does not slow down your metabolism, quite the opposite, it ramps it up. So we do not feel lousy and lethargic and drained if you're not eating for a while. We actually feel good. And it makes complete sense from the evolutionary point of view of our Paleolithic ancestors haven't been more alert and more awake to actually get that next skill. We wouldn't have survived. And in fact, in modern times, everyone in my clinic and everyone I've ever talked to has been fasting for a few days. They feel energized, they feel happy, they just feel fantastic. And many people feel from day 3 onwards, it just feels like you can do this forever. So the body is not starving. The body is utilizing fat. It consumes what you have consumed 10 years or a week ago. It's there for the taking. And also these elevated adrenaline levels, they also promote the glycogen release from the liver. So you can have that sort of low-grade sugar level, and then it also facilitates the fat burning. So adrenaline, a little bit of elevated adrenaline is a good thing. It doesn't harm anybody, and it doesn't cause you any stress. Those low levels of glucose and the elevated stress hormones activate our pituitary gland. So that's a tiny little pea-sized little thing in the middle of our skull. And what that does, it releases growth hormone. Growth hormone is a wonderful thing. So what does it do? As the name suggests, it obviously is involved in growth. So it is a massive metabolism booster. What it also does, it does lots of cell repair. It rejuvenates your skin cells. It repairs your bones, your muscle. It's a really powerful repairing tool. If you want to stay young, you need growth hormone, big time. And there's actually a huge black market happening where people pay up to $600 to have just 0.5 ml of growth hormone injected. And in fact, there have been some studies, especially in the old and very fragile people. And if they had growth hormone injected, it did indeed gave them a better lean muscle mass and they had better cardiac function, but it was also associated with lots of negative side effects. So that's why it's really not common practice to use growth hormone, only in very, very rare circumstances. But you can have that all completely for free. You just fast. After just 3 days of fasting, your growth hormone levels go up by 300%. 3 days of fasting, 300% higher growth hormone levels. If you fast for an entire week, you have 1,250% increase of growth hormone. So you really want to have growth hormone. It's an excellent thing to have. So overweight people or people that have insulin resistance, they usually are quite low in growth hormones. You want to have a booster? Fast. And it does not come with a surprise that the bodybuilding industry hooked into this. So there's this famous bodybuilder, Brett Pine, who actually wrote a book about it. So they do high intensity training. They want to have as low body fat as possible. And they have understood that 6 meals a day and all this protein loading is really not a beneficial and good thing to do. If you want to have muscle growth, you need growth hormones. So growth hormones in fasting, when people have been fasting, actually had after the fasting, that prolonged fasting, a few days at least, they have higher lean muscle mass. So the muscles are actually growing and they don't have to do anything for it. And of course, I would be lying if you just fast for a few days and you wake up one morning and you look like this. That's probably not happening. So you do need to exercise as well. But the fact is, if you train in the fasted state, your muscles grow faster, you get stronger faster, and you have a much shorter recovery time. So that's all proven. It only works, however, if you're well hydrated. So it's bad news for all those religious fasting people that do a dry fast where they don't drink as well. It doesn't work. So what's very, very important is having enough fluids. And I'm talking about water, tea, or coffee without any sugar or milk in it. So what's also happening is a beautiful process of autophagy. Autophagy means self-eating, basically translated. And it starts around 18 hours of fasting and it gradually increases over time and reaches about its maximum at about 3 days. So what's it triggered by? Low mTOR levels. So if nothing comes in, the body needs to do something. And there's a Japanese scientist, Yoshinori Oshumi, who actually won the Nobel Prize in 2016 for the discovery of the mechanisms of autophagy. And I want to just briefly explain what's actually happening. So here's just a standard cell. It could be any cell. It could be a muscle cell, a heart cell, a nerve cell, anything. So every cell has got a couple of organelles in there. And where there's work, there's wear and tear. Some of those organelles are not well functioning and they're probably quite old. So when the body doesn't get any energy, it says, hey, I need something, recycle. And that's exactly what our body is doing. So those cells know exactly which organelles are not functioning very well. And they basically get packed up in the lysosomes and get cleaned out, especially the mitochondria, who are often experiencing a lot of oxidative stress because they have to produce all the energy for us all the time. And for the cell, it's like a little bit like a spring clean. It's like if you clean out your house, it doesn't mean your house is not functioning anymore. It's just cleaner, it's less junk. So all those organelles are broken down into their little bits and pieces in their basic building blocks, and then they get exported out of the cell into the bloodstream. And here, voila, we have new building blocks. So the body can basically utilize those building blocks to make new enzymes and new products, or just burns it for energy. So autophagy is in no way cell death or cell destruction. It's actually an orderly process where all the old unused cell organelles are recycled and to turn it into energy or new building blocks. So if you want to renovate your old kitchen and nothing is working anymore, you chuck it out first as well before you bring in the new stuff. So it's probably easier to explain that with Lego. So we have one compartment, cells or tissues, and they get dismantled into its single building blocks, and then they get improved and new things happening. So after a fast, you're actually a better, stronger, more resilient, younger person of yourself. And they actually have done some trials and studies with patients, with cancer patients. So they fasted those people for 36 hours before they have been given the chemotherapy. 36 hours is just 1.5 days. It's really not a long time to fast. And then they got their chemotherapy, and what they found, those patients felt so much better. They had significantly less side effects because their normal cells have been more resistant, more resilient and stronger, and the cancer cells died off much easier. So some cancer centers do that quite frequently. Others are still holding back a little bit, but the research is definitely backing it up, and the patients really appreciate it. So again, what turns on autophagy? It's the low levels of nutrient sensors, which is the insulin and the mTOR. If you're constantly eating, even if you eat just a very, very small amount of food, it would turn those nutrient sensors up, and autophagy would be turned off, basically. Autophagy is also a fantastic method for preventing or improving Alzheimer conditions. So Alzheimer's, as we know, is a form of dementia where the memory and the cognitive functions are significantly impaired. And what Alzheimer is, it's basically an accumulation of beta amyloid plaques. So that's something that happens on a regular basis with normal brain metabolism. So they're constantly there. But if you're insulin resistant and your garbage removal doesn't work as properly anymore, these amyloid plaques start to accumulate and basically destroy all your synaptic connections. So with autophagy, we basically provide that sort of recycle truck, and we load up all those amyloid plaques, and potentially it helps them to clean out the amyloid plaques, and we declutter the brain. And there's actually lots of research out there as well that people who are demented and they fast for just a couple of days, their cognitive function improves significantly. So here's another really cool thing that's going to happen with fasting, and that's stem cell activation and mobilization. So stem cells are these really beautiful cells that can turn into anything. They're completely undifferentiated. They have no purpose yet. They come from our bone marrow, and they get sent throughout our body wherever there's need. They can become intestinal cells, they become liver cells, cardiac cells, they can become nerve cells, blood cells, or muscle cells, anything you want. So if you want to have a stem cell transplant, just pay $500,000 and you get it. Not a problem, right? So when you fast, so you get small benefits from stem cell mobilization just after 24 hours of fasting. But if you want to have the real benefit, if you want to really have that kicking in, you need to fast at least 3 days. And what happens? So they have tried in the past, for example, with people that have damaged hearts from a heart attack. So where parts of the heart muscle is not functioning anymore, is completely dead. So they tried to inject stem cells externally, but the uptake was very, very minimal. It was actually not really successful, so it didn't really work. However, if you are fasting and you make your own stem cells, your body knows exactly where it's needed, because all the cells that start chucking out all the unused organelles or tissues that are starting to break down a couple of unused cells. And then the body gives a shopping list to the stem cells or to the bone marrow and say, hey, when there's supply coming in, I need this and this and this and this. And the body knows exactly where to go to actually rejuvenate. So you don't have to spend $500,000, which is not, and then you don't get any, then you get something which doesn't even work. You just do it by yourself. It's easy, it's fast, and it doesn't cost you a cent. So again, in order to get stem cell activation, you need to be well hydrated. It does not work if you're not drinking enough water or fluids in general. And some studies have actually shown, I think it was from the Boston University, that if you fast just 7 days, twice a year, your lifetime risk of cancer actually goes down by 70 to 80%, depends on the study. That's absolutely fantastic. I mean, what's 7 days? That's nothing. And you feel great and you feel fantastic. So it's not even hard to do. So all those weird and wonderful things that are happening, the lack of food intake and all the hormonal changes with the mTOR and growth hormone and stress levels, after about 36 hours of fasting, it leads to an activation of a gene called FOXO3. So FOXO3 is a fantastic gene. It does lots of wonderful, cool stuff, let me tell you. But before I dig into this, I would like to let you know that vitamin D is ultra important. Vitamin D is not only good for our bone health, but it's also involved in over 300 gene expression. So that means gene expression means our DNA can unfold and make those proteins and enzymes you need for any specific circumstance. So please get out in the sun. Don't be too shy with the sun. You need vitamin D or take capsules, whatever you prefer. So let's dig into the FOXO3 story. So FOXO3 is a very potent antioxidant. So FOXO3 triggers another cascade of genes and activates all our internal antioxidant genes in the body. Well, why would you want to have antioxidants? Well, to combat oxidative stress. There's always a bit of oxidative stress happening to a more or less degree, depending heavily on our lifestyle. And antioxidants also promote the healing from inflammatory conditions. So you really want to have FOXO3 working to its full capacity. There have been studies proving that if someone has rheumatoid arthritis, they usually have lower levels of FOXO3. And if they get a FOXO3 transplanted via RNA, they actually have significant improvement of their symptoms. So, of course, the supplement industry kicked into this as well. And you can buy some of those internal antioxidants in the bottle. So for one is like carnosine. You pay $50 to $60 per bottle. It's very popular in the sports industry, but it's also sold as the magic longevity sort of drug. Ergothioneine is another one. You pay between $100 and over $200 per bottle. And it's actually linked to improved heart, liver, and bone health and overall better health anyway. Or you go for the xanthine, which is between $20 and $50 per bottle. And it actually is used as supplement in cancer treatment because it has been shown that xanthine is actually actively reducing breast cancer cell proliferation. So the cancer cells are actually getting smaller. It also promotes beautiful skin health. It's very popular in the bodybuilding industry because it prevents muscle damage. And it's popular in the sports industry as well. So our body activates so much more antioxidants. So technically, you don't have to spend all this money. You can have that homemade. And again, there are some studies that say, it's actually not really doing much if you pop it as a pill. They don't really see that there's any sort of benefit when you get those antioxidants externally. But if you activate your FOXO gene, it actually does a lot of good stuff. So I just want to say something briefly about turmeric. Turmeric has been known for its anti-inflammatory activity, but turmeric in itself has absolutely no anti-inflammatory properties. But what turmeric is doing, it activates FOXO3. I mean, how cool is that? So if I would take any supplements whatsoever, I would probably put my greatest bet on turmeric. So what does FOXO3 do as well? So it actually repairs our DNA. Why do we have to repair it? Well, there's constantly some oxidative stress going on, and there's constantly DNA damage depending what comes from our environment, from our food, and just from our own metabolism. So it happens all the time. But there's one fact, your gene instability and the DNA damage accelerates with age. So the older you get, the more DNA damage you have. So if you give your body the chance to fast every now and then, it actually gives your body the chance to repair all of this. So your FOXO3 gene is going to repair whatever is broken down. So that's why FOXO3 often gets the loving name of longevity gene as well. It's not a bad thing to do. So what else is it doing? So it protects our telomeres. So telomeres are those red little end bits on our chromosomes, where the chromosomes hold our DNA, our entire genetic material. And every time when a cell is dividing, so our cells divide all the time, the telomeres are shortening for a little bit. So that's why every cell has got a set number of cell divisions, and when that's reached, the telomeres are so short and the cell is basically having a programmed cell death. So FOXO3 is actually protecting those telomeres and makes them longer. What that means is your cells are living longer and they can replicate a few more times than without it. So here again, it is a full-on longevity gene. And of course, FOXO3 is another activator for autophagy. Remember, it just cleans out those old debris, it cleans out all the damaged stuff out of the cells, and it promotes that recycling or upcycling in the cells. So much for FOXO3. It's a really cool gene. I mean, you must admit that. So what else is fasting? Fasting is detox big time. So in general, the body is quite able to detoxify on a daily basis, but we still take a lot of toxins in through the skin, through the food, through the air, and some toxins are just building up in our fat tissue. So that's where most of our toxins are building up, just simply build up from life. So when we are fasting, fat mobilization happens big time. And all the sort of toxic byproducts which we get from just living get mobilized big time. And then they get excreted via the kidneys or via the guts, and we just flush it down the toilet. So fasting is toxin mobilization big time. It's on a large scale. And that's why people that have renal impairment or their kidneys are not working as well, they should do prolonged fasting really only under medical supervision, or they just don't do prolonged fasting. It really depends on their renal health. But if the kidneys are working well and you're well hydrated, it doesn't harm your kidney. You just flush out all the toxins down the loo. Just get rid of them.
So after all of this, I hope I could make clear that fasting does not equal hunger, because that's basically prevented by the ketone levels. You won't feel hungry. That fasting does not equal lethargy. Your adrenaline and noradrenaline levels go up. You're not feeling lethargic. That fasting is not muscle wasting. The growth hormone simply prevents it. That fasting does not mean dangerously low glucose level or hypoglycemia, because your liver makes glucose all the time out of your fat and a few proteins that come around. And that you're not ending up completely delusional, because BDNF and ketones simply prevent that. So I think we can safely say myth busted. So when I ask you now, hey, how do you feel about a couple of days or 3 days of non-eating? I hope you think now, oh my God, I'm going to feel so good. I get energy. I get complete cell rejuvenation. I will improve my resilience. And I will be a better, stronger, and younger version of myself. So I hope you enjoyed this video. It's probably very different to what most people believe it is. And if you found it useful, or you think a friend of yours find it useful, please share the video. In my next video, I'm going to tell you how I approach fasting in my clinic and what the experiences are of some of my patients, and how fasting can be done. Okay. Hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. Bye.